One. All right, I'm Matt Davio with the 1 Minute Trader podcast, and I'm back today with special guest Robin Hanson. Robin is an associate professor of economics at George Mason down in lovely Virginia. How's the weather there today in Virginia?
It's sunny and beautiful.
Awesome. So the reason I wanted to have Robin on is really a couple, the first two reasons I wanted to have him on. I saw some of the writings that he did on his new book that's called The Elephant in the Brain, Hidden Motives in Everyday Life, and that's coming out very soon. And then you've got your first book, The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth. Now, I was just saying to Robin before he came on that your background is very impressive to me. You've got a BS in physics from UC Irvine. You went to the University of Chicago, not for economics though, but you did go for physics and conceptual foundations of science. And then you got your PhD in social science focusing on institutional design at Caltech. Wow, that's some pretty heady stuff.
Excessively diverse.
So, I'm a trader. The reason why I wanted to ask you, and I guess let's jump off right here. What are your thoughts on our latest Nobel Prize winning economist, Mr. Thaler?
So economics was traditionally focused on a relatively small number of assumptions and small number of powerful theories that would apply across a wide range of areas. And behavioral economics, which Mr. Thaler was one of the champions of, is more saying that instead of this relatively small number of powerful assumptions, there's just lots of context-specific behavior that you just need to study in each context to see which way it goes. The general behavioral economics is just a grab bag of things that might happen, but you don't really know what happens in any one context unless you go look at that.
Right.
In a world where that's true, there's less of a point for economic theorists. There's less of a point to saying, hey, economists, why don't you go study this topic and tell me what's going on here? Because there is no one thing that's going on in general. There's just a lot of specific things. And then you want a lot more people who study each particular area. Well, on the other hand, you might not be able to trust that as much because it's kind of noisy. And so meta policy matters more. That is, it matters more like step up a level and say, okay, we've got these people who claim to know things about various policy areas. How are we going to decide who to trust and what institutions to use to keep them in line?
Right.
And you're more looking at that meta institution, and it's less about, oh, there's these economists who know things. Let's go ask them the answer about how to regulate banks, et cetera, because there just is less of a generic answer you can go look up or figure out because there is just less of a general theory that applies.
So how do you become a professor in economics when you have no PhD in economics? I'm curious.
Well, I have a PhD in economics.
Oh, you do?
Okay. It's in social science, basically. So Caltech has such a small social science department that, I actually went on the market of political science first and did a little better there the first time I went on the market. And then I got a postdoc in health policy at Berkeley. And then the second time I went on the market, I got an economics job.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That's where I was trying to put that together. But you also spent some time right out of undergrad as a physics major working for Lockheed and also working with NASA, right?
Yeah,
and
I was a pretty old student when I started. So I started my PhD program at the age of 34 with two children, age 0 and 2.
God bless
so
you.
I'd had a 9-year career as a research software engineer.
And that was in the mid 80s to late 80s, and you were
right.
really, and at that time you were focused on artificial intelligence. So now that artificial intelligence is front page news, tell us what you were doing 25 years, 30 years ago when it was, pretty new.
It's less different than you might think in the sense that for a long time, artificial intelligence has these booms of interest and concern, and then sort of winters in between. And this was one of the big AI summers, if you will, a boom of interest in the early 1980s. And I was a naive 20-year-old sitting in the library at the University of Chicago reading about these things. And I thought, wow, that's cool. They're telling me that AI is just around the corner. Look at these powerful demos and all these great things. If I don't jump into here, it'll all be over because this is where everything's at.
And here we are.
So I bought that and I went off to Silicon Valley and weaseled my way into a job doing artificial intelligence, even though I had no background in it.
Cool.
At Lockheed. And then on the side, I did hypertext publishing. But basically, as usual, these booms are disappointing in the sense that the hype, people are very selective about the demos and what they actually do, and it generalizes much less than you might think from the demos of the hyped claims. Mm-hmm. And then, slowly over time, people retrench and do simpler, easier things. And then there's a time when people are just, it's one of those has-been things, but then another decade or two and a new burst of interest. And often what happens is there's a new demo and you say, wow, look at that. No one's ever had a computer do that before.
Right.
We must be almost there. Computers doing everything.
Right.
And you got to think, well, that's been true for centuries. Like every 10 years or two, there's a new thing machines were never able to do before. Right. And that doesn't mean we're almost there. Doesn't mean we're remotely near almost there. But still,
and it also probably doesn't mean that robots are going to take over our lives tomorrow or in the next 25 years for that matter. And the context will be a little bit slower probably than we would like to. A lot
slower than some would say. But of course, in the media, they're far more interested in the extreme claims.
Oh, yeah.
These sort of moderated claims are kind of boring and they're not that interested in. And when people have conference and they invite speakers, they don't want to invite a speaker who says, well, yeah, we'll muddle along for another few decades and it'll be a few interesting things. No, people want speakers who say, it's all about to change and there's a vast revolution.
Right.
Sign up for my course and I'll explain how you can be the winner in the future.
So let's talk about that a little bit because I actually watched one of your, because it's a good jump off spot for your latest book, The Elephant in the Brain. I love the name, by the way. It's a great play on words. And also, I have a lot of interest in just neuroscience in general. I'm just a local when it comes to understanding the brain, but I love reading stuff like you're putting out there. And so, tell us about the elephant in the brain because I think it's kind of an idea that evolved from kind of maybe a little bit more micro to a more macro book. And a pretty lofty book, I would say.
It's a grand, ambitious book. Now, the title, the credit goes to my co-author, Kevin Simler.
Okay.
And a lot of the better quality writing credit goes to him as well. The core topic of the book is, I think, the one thing I've most learned over a long career in social science. And so it's the one thing I hope to communicate to the world and pass it on, which is that we social scientists tend to be too gullible about why people do things. So, for most of the things humans do, there's a usual story about why they do it. There's a usual. I'm sorry, you seem to be paused.
Yeah, I see that, but I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
So if people say they go to school to learn the material, then we social scientists tend to assume that must be what they're doing, and we develop more elaborate theories of how that could be and what they're doing and why. And then we usually run into a lot of puzzles, things that don't really make that much sense from this basic point of view, but we elaborate auxiliary assumptions and other explanations of incompetence and government regulation, et cetera, in order to make sense of these various things that aren't making sense. Mm-hmm. And we just do this over and over again all through the world. We assume that people are basically doing things for the reasons they say. And I realized a while ago that if you just assume that people are doing things for pretty different reasons than they say, a lot of things can make a lot more sense.
Right.
And not only in schooling, but in medicine and in politics and all over the place. So a lot of these puzzles go away if you just say, well, they're not doing it for the reason they say.
Right.
And that's a big way that we can improve policy better. That is, we often say design better school systems so that they could learn the material faster. And we're surprised that people are quite uninterested in these reforms.
I apologize for my loss of video, but people aren't here to watch me anyway. So but I am here. I'm trying to get it back on, but we'll just proceed. So, with the idea of the elephant in the brain, my understanding, and I've read, let's say 90% of the book. I did not finish it. I tried as best I could, Robin. But I'm going to finish it, but I'm going to be honest, I didn't finish it right before we came on, but I've got 90% of it done. When you're talking about the quadrants of the brain, this is what again, this jump off spot of kind of where that elephant is, give our viewers a good idea of really what you're proposing here and how the internal wiring and conflict that goes on in our own brains, because that's fascinating, I think, to me, and I think others will find it fascinating.
So the elephant in the brain is a play on the common phrase, the elephant in the room. So as you know, the elephant in the room is something we all know about that's really quite relevant to what we're talking about, that we're all going to pretend isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going to go on ignoring it because it would be awkward to acknowledge it.
Right.
And so in our brains, there is the fact that we are relatively selfish in many ways. And that drives a lot of our behavior. But we'd rather pretend that we had more grand motives for a lot of things we do. And we often try to spin most things we do in a high-minded direction so as to make it sound like it was driven by high-minded motives. And we often let each other do that, and even, not even aware that we're doing it. Right. And that's the elephant in our brain, is the fact that we are just not noticing a lot of evidence that pretty clearly says we're not doing things for the reasons that we say. But we'd rather just not look at that.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that obviously we're hardwired this way? There is, and you're suggesting possibly there's some evolution that could be learned. Being aware, number one, that being the first step, and then turning that into really a paradoxical way of flipping it on its head, and as you said, breaking down possibly big systems. I know you use the example of the medical world, right away in your book, and that's a fantastic one because it's obvious to most of us that it's clearly broken.
Right. So we evolved. Humans evolved strong social norms and ways to enforce norms. That's the biggest difference between humans and the other primates that we developed away from. And chimps have a lot of politics and they have a very complicated social world, but they're pretty overt about it. They create coalitions and they try to win and they try to beat up on the other coalitions, etc. And humans instead, we developed weapons, and then we had language. And with weapons and language, we're able to have norms like no one should beat anybody up, and no one should rape or murder, and we should share food, and we should talk together before we do anything. And we enforce these norms by being able to sort of see somebody violating the norm and then say in language to other people that they had done that and convince them that they had done that, and then use weapons to enforce our rules and punishments on them.
Right.
And so because of this, we humans are very focused on norms and who's violating them. And plausibly, these big brains we have and the ability to do reasoning and storytelling are mostly in order to tell stories and reasons about who's violating what norms. That is, constantly when we're walking around doing things, in the back of our minds, we're thinking, if someone were to challenge me here and claim that I was violating a norm, what would they challenge me on, and what would my excuse be? And we're constantly working out a little story about everything we do, about what our excuse would be if somebody were to say, what are you doing there? That doesn't look right. And so, and a lot of our norms are in terms of motives. If I accidentally punch you in the face just by swinging around, I'm okay. But if I did it on purpose, well, now it's much more of a problem. And so we are trying to talk about our motives most of the time. We're saying, well, what story could I tell about what good motives I had at doing this, so that if somebody were to challenge me, I'd be okay. And we're also looking opportunistically for our rivals. When they're doing something, what could I accuse them of, and how can I nail it to them by showing that they were doing something with bad motives? And so we are so eager to attribute good motives to ourselves that we don't really notice that we are just lying in some sense about why we're doing a lot of things.
So I'm curious about this because you go into detail on I think 10 different areas, from body language to gosh, I'm just drawing a blank. But you've got 10 items laid out that are clear where this goes on. Would you say that, like, for me, I think that some of us, I'll speak for myself, because I tend to have a lot of body language that I don't even know I'm doing when I'm doing it. So let's talk about that. Like, how is that hardwired? How do I become more aware, and change that?
So the first thing to notice is that, you spend years in school learning to read and write, and we're very explicit about thinking about that. And then we have all this body language which communicate a lot with, and we're not even aware of it. You might think, why aren't we aware of this? Why is this such a hidden thing to us? And the plausible explanation is that the things we're saying with body languages are things we wouldn't want to say straight out directly.
Yes. I'm guilty as charged, by the way.
And then being conscious of what we were saying on our body language would make us awkwardly aware of it, and therefore harder to deny it when somebody accuses of it. So we are unaware of it exactly so that we can pretend we're not doing it.
And then Robin, do we become less aware because we're focused on our body language versus what you're telling me, our conversation?
Well, if you start to become more aware of body language of yourself and others, there's a benefit is that you will understand better what's going on, but there'll be the cost that you will less be able to deny the various illicit things you're doing and that they're doing in the body language. And obviously evolution overall has decided that that second cost is higher than the first benefit, and that's why you aren't aware. So I can already tell you right from the start, if you're going to start to become aware of these things, you got to be aware that you'll be paying a cost that evolution thought wasn't worth it.
And so again, there's that big elephant again in the side of the brain. I mean, how do you approach such a lofty subject with folks at a dinner party?
Well, you cautiously and see whether people are open or not. I mean, I wouldn't push this on people. And in fact, that would be the general point here about this whole book, which is I want there to be a book where if you've got, say, some sort of mildly dissatisfied 20-year-old who says, everybody's been lying to me. Isn't there anywhere I can go for the truth?
Right.
You could hand them something, say, I'm not sure you want to know, but if you really want to know, here it is. But it's not necessarily something that it's going to do everybody good to know, in the sense that, as again, evolution decided on average this wasn't worth your knowing, that you were better off not knowing. But I think those of us who study the social world and who make proposals for social reforms, it's more on us to understand these things.
Right. Because
if we don't, we're going to just be completely off on our proposals. So we at least should pay the cost, whatever these costs are, to understand these things better and look our elephant in the eye and admit our selfish motives.
So, okay, so you and I, when we came on, I told you a little bit about my background. You told me, I said I was very intrigued about yours. I just love when people go into all these disparate paths and it all kind of comes together. As a performing trader for 28 years in the marketplace, I told you I've always had an intuit as far as reading people and kind of whether it's manias or overly depressive in the markets. It's always been I've been comfortable in doing that. So what role do you think traders play with that elephant in behavioral economics? Do traders actually serve a purpose?
I think the first question to ask is, why do people trade? That's the first question in all these areas. Each one of my 10 chapters about a different kind of thing we're doing. The first thing I say is, what's the usual story about why we do this? What are the puzzles with that? And what's a more plausible explanation?
Right.
So if you want to bring up trading, the first question to ask is, why are people trading? There's a theory in their head. Well, I want to make money. That's why I'm trading. That's the easy thing everybody will tell you about why they're trading, right?
Yep.
And of course, it's fun to make money, and that's why they're trading.
Yep. I actually tell people that for me, it's about freedom. I can talk to people like you when I want, how I want.
Well, that money gives you that freedom, though, right?
Absolutely, but being able to definitely, I think. But money to me is a byproduct. Like understanding the way that people behave has been, as I said, maybe I was just gifted that. It was more intuitive for me. But people are always, I think they're irrational in short periods of time until they get to a level of rationality. I think in general we're rational beings, but it takes some time for that behavior to become aware, be in the moment, and right. Grounded, I guess, is a way of putting it.
So there's a bunch of obvious data points about trading that are at odds with this theory that people are just trying to make money, and say that you could also say, and they're mildly risk averse and don't want to spend too much time with it, and they're lazy, right? That would be the simple standard story. But as we were discussing before, for financial speculation, you could just invest in an index fund or some average of everything and not do any trading and get the average return.
Right.
And traders are trying to do better than that, right?
Right.
They're not just taking the average return. They're buying, and then on something somebody else is selling, or they're selling and someone else is buying. And so one of those parties can be making money only if the other one's losing it relative to the average return of them just taking the average asset. And in addition, they suffer a transaction cost and they lose time.
Right.
So on average, these traders are doing worse than the index fund, consistently overall on average. And that's got to be one big puzzle, because if someone like you is consistently making money, then there are other people who are consistently losing money.
Right.
And why are they there? Another set of puzzles is we see an enormous amount of indirection of investment that doesn't actually give extra return. So like I gave a talk at a conference for retirement fund investment advisory agencies. And it turns out if you have a retirement fund in your company is hiring some guy to sit there and manage the fund, manage the whole process.
Right.
And then your whole company is hiring an investment advisory agency whose whole job is to think about where your investment should go.
Yeah.
And they're going to recommend an actual investment company, which holds a bunch of other companies.
Right.
And every guy in that chain is taking a cut.
Yep.
And so you can't possibly be on average making money relative to that. The company should just dump it all in an index fund and not even hire the guy at the company to manage it. They should.
Right.
That would be the straightforward solution, but that's not what they do. And that's also somewhat puzzling.
Right.
So I know, and I can add more puzzles, but if you want to go there, but basically the question is why these puzzling deviations from the simple theory that people just want to make money.
Well, so one of my if we both agree that free markets are only free to a certain extent, and that there's free will, the participants can do sometimes what they want, sometimes they have to do what the boss wants. But I think the most important role that traders do provide ultimately is price discovery. Do you think that's a true thing?
Yeah, but you're switching the subject, which is what kind of people, again, the point of the elephant in the brain is this is what people want to do.
Right.
You want to switch to it like some high-minded overall good thing. And
this is great. I'm fine to play. I'm fine to get on the couch with
yes,
you.
Even it might be good for the world on average for all these people who lose money. Nevertheless, from their point of view, it's a puzzle why they're doing it.
Right.
And we have to wonder what's going on.
So, if I'm going to be, to be able to look at myself in the mirror on this one, I would say that there's definitely, for me, there's definitely a sense of ego in that I'm smarter than the next guy. I'm more nimble. I'm more open-minded, right? Therefore, I can take advantage of these things, right? So that's the truth.
A big part of trading when you do it yourself is kind of trying to show off your ability. So I think it's a lot like a bar bet or even a fight or a sporting contest, right? If two people go, you play tennis with someone and other people are maybe watching, or you might brag about the tennis game. I mean, you're both losing time, but so one of you will win, and the other one at least shows they weren't chicken to try.
Yep.
And they're at least better than someone who wouldn't even try.
Right.
And similarly for a bar bet, somebody challenges you to a bet on something you said, well, you might back down, but that would look bad. You might take the bet and then lose on average, but it still look better than backing down.
Right.
And somebody might win on average. And similarly, people have that attitude to financial trading. You don't want to take the public position that you don't think you're good enough to win.
But I also take the I do see myself as more of a risk manager, and I really don't know anything. All I can tell you is where the market is, where it's been, and make some type of what I believe to be educated guess. And sometimes,
but if you're consistently winning, you're doing that better than average, a lot better than average.
Right. But again, as far as if I'm gonna look in the mirror and say, well, but why am I,
But you get to be proud of that. That's a thing that other people would like to be proud of, and they can't be, and you can have it. So you're winning in this status game.
So then it comes back to status, and again, I try not to be. It's a very humbling business because you're gonna go through periods of winning and or losing all the time.
So. I mean, status is really important to people, but almost no one at the moment will tell you they're doing something for status. It's very puzzling.
Yeah, well, I would tell.
How could it be that everybody at the moment will tell you they're not doing this for status? Nevertheless, status seems to be an important motivation for a lot of things humans do.
Well, that's interesting because I would say I went through a period where I traded for a couple of hedge funds, and I could say I was a hedge fund trader, and that to me that was maybe more status driven than just being a trader. So now if I tell people now, it's kind of the same thing. It depends on who, this is a good way of looking at it. It depends on who's in the room, who I know, who I don't know, how they ask the question. Sometimes.
But a very common human norm is against bragging.
Right.
And so we tend to try to avoid overt bragging, although we do a lot of indirect bragging, as you'll notice.
Yes. Yeah.
But we avoid the overt bragging. And so that saying I'm going to do something for status is kind of bragging, and people feel uncomfortable with that.
Right.
I mean, another puzzle in trading is this indirection. Not only why do people trade themselves, why do they hire other people to trade for them and then take such a big cut, like 2 and 20,
right,
that they really couldn't be making money on average?
And why so what's your theory on that one? Because
one theory is that you're buying an association. So I know a guy. I gave a talk at a hedge fund in New York a few years ago, and the head was saying basically, we could get a lot more money into this fund and manage it, but every new source of money we get is somebody who thinks they can call me all the time.
Yep. And that's true. So I can tell you personally that is
right.
That is
absolutely
it's just puzzling,
true. Right? If they just want the money, why do they? Why do they feel like they should have to call you all the time? Why not just let you invest the money and walk away with your money? But what they're buying is a relationship, and somewhat the ability to brag about it.
That's interesting, because I agree with that, and even I'm sure you've thought and written about this. Guys like Bernie and Madoff, like, how does he do what he did for as long as he did? And
people are willing to not look as carefully at the gift horse if they're getting this relationship out of it. And it's also, I think, when you have a relationship with a doctor or a real estate agent or a financial advisor, if part of that relationship is some sort of a status relationship where they're a high status person and you're affiliated with them and they kind of like you and you're high status by affiliation with another high status person, that whole affiliation is degraded if you're suspicious of them and they're suspicious of you.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you're trying not to be very suspicious of each other, giving each other the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
You would like them to be seen publicly to be giving you the benefit of the doubt, and in turn you try to give them the benefit of the doubt, and that means you can be taken advantage of because you are trying not to be very careful at looking for problems.
It's a vicious circle. If Samuelson was alive today, would he be a behavioral economist?
That's hard to say. Again, he was in an era where we were looking for a relatively small number of simple, powerful theories. Presumably, like the rest of us, he would be persuaded by the evidence that it's just not as simple as we wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite like physics, where the world is that simple, honestly.
Yeah.
In physics, the world is as simple as economists were hoping it was in economics.
Right.
Which it turns out it's not. But he still might be pushing on the edge. Well, it's still more interesting to focus on the general parts of the theory, even if there is a lot of messy detail. And that's where I am actually personally. I'm actually not personally that interested in all the messy behavioral details. That motivates me to look at meta policy.
Right.
How can we create larger, higher level policies that are robust to whatever these behavioral details are? How can we give people incentives to figure out these behavioral details and take them into account their behavior? And if we can find a generalized system like that, then we don't need to know these details so much.
I mean, do you think that, I'll get off the subject and then I'm going to swing back to the stacks of books behind you in the academia. Do you think there's quantitative evidence to support, because I know a lot of people in your world don't believe it supports the behavioral economics on the quantitative side. I mean, where do you sit on that?
It's pretty obvious that there's a lot of messy detail. But often the behaviorists try to talk as if they had some general theories that were just as general, but now they're different.
Mm-hmm.
General behavioral theories, and that doesn't really cut it either.
Right.
There really is a lot of context-dependent mess.
Yeah.
Before people were saying there's this general tendency to be overconfident. Well, no, there's not. Some contexts were overconfident, and some were less, and it's different for men in one context and women in another, and blah blah blah.
Well, and
it's not like we're all evenly well calibrated all the way down the line, but it's not like we're all just generically overconfident either.
Correct, and so this is interesting because I believe I'm a discretionary trader, meaning I don't really have 100 different quantitative models that a lot of these people are coming up with, because I don't believe still to this date that machines can contextualize the nuances of markets, and that it really does take nothing but time in front of a screen or in a pit to really get that. I think.
But even that's context dependent. There will come a day when the machines are able to do it as well as you, and hopefully you'll notice that day and switch your behavior.
That's correct.
But roughly today, you're right.
Yeah. So when it comes to when let's come back to I always like to I'm sure people have asked you this. So on the meta side, when you're looking at I look at institutions from from our overall government today, our scholarship and academia and healthcare, all kind of being the same messy, if you know, to use your word, very messy behavioral systems right now. With
I actually disagree with that to some extent. That is, one standard story is, behaviorists say, well, medicine is not simple the way you thought. It's not just, people getting healthier because medicine is expensive and they need insurance, et cetera. There are all these detailed behavioral heuristics people are using, and that explains the detailed complexity of our medical institutions. I actually think there are relatively simple explanations for our medical institutions and a number of these other institutions we have. They're just the elephant in the brain explanations. They're ones we don't like to admit and look at. Okay,
so give me a couple real world examples in your mind that if people.
So I'd say medicine is largely about showing that we care.
Right.
We're mainly trying to spend resources to show that we care enough to spend them.
Okay.
And that's the driving behavior in medicine, and that's why we are actually not so pay much attention to effectiveness.
Uh-huh.
And we're not so reluctant to spend a lot, because the spending is kind of the point.
And that's all. Is that also why you think there's that end of life skew in our medical system? In this,
it's actually only a modest end of life skew. It's less than many people think, but it's there. You might say in the last year of life, maybe 10% of medicine or something is spent, which is more than proportionally, of course, but it's still not most of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely a lot of the difficulty in producing medical reforms is if you assume that people are trying to get healthy and trying to minimize their spending in order to do so, you would think there's a lot of the reforms we've come up with they ought to be interested in, and they're just not.
Right.
And I would say plausibly it's because at some level they know that they are trying to mostly show that they care, and they're more interested in that than these other things they say they want.
So, and then on the like having two, I've got 4 kids. 2 are new college students, 2 years in for one year, first year for the other. Is it different today than when you and I were in college? We're about the same age, how do you see that?
I'm not an expert on this, but I certainly see that, we spend a lot more on comfort and convenience in college these days.
Oh my gosh, isn't that true?
So, the dorms are much bigger and nicer. And
yeah.
There's a lot many more clubs and other student support buildings, and there's a lot more committees and parts of administration to handle various other programs.
Uh-huh.
And then students are just they're not spending so many hours studying.
Yeah, so you see that, right? I'm curious.
Yeah,
would you see,
sure.
Give me a...
Yeah, I'm a college professor, yes.
Yeah.
But of course, a lot depends on the level of the school you're at and things like that. So that's always a harder thing to do. Just in general, most professors went to a school with higher level students than where they teach.
Right.
And so that'll bias their perceptions of the difference between where they were when they were a student and where they are now.
And what's your
try to correct for that? What's
your favorite class that you're teaching right now?
Well, I'm only teaching one class, but it is one of my favorites. It's law and economics.
Cool. Okay.
And that's another. It's a course where we take sort of basic economic concepts and we try to analyze what the law should be, assuming that we were trying to do with the law what we say we're trying to do, which is just to minimize accidents and costly interactions and make people have deals they can commit to and keep. And there's a lot of things in the law that make sense from that point of view, but then there's a whole bunch of other strange things in the law that that we really can't square with our basic theory of what the law is for, which suggests that the law is for some other things in addition to the things we say it's for.
Now, you're involved with a company that is involved in prediction market research, and you're basically the chief scientist there. And this is really I think this is probably a crown in your work. You have a lot of focus in this area. How would you explain to people kind of idea futures, and what does that mean to you, and how would you explain that?
The phrase people usually use today is prediction markets. That means the same thing.
Okay.
So the key idea is that, say you're an organization and you have a project and a deadline, and you're wondering what's the chance you'll make the deadline.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of ways you could try to do that. You could try to collect a data set of previous projects and deadline and crunch some statistics. You could do a survey of asking people. You could put together some committee that assigns people to different subtasks and come together with a common report. But that often the forecast you'll get is just going to be biased by the fact that people would like to look good and tell you the project's going to make the deadline when it actually isn't. And so the question is, well, what if you want to cut through that sort of bull? How could you do that? And one way to do that that's really quite cheap, effective, and reliable is to set up a betting market.
Yes.
You have people bet on whether they'll make the deadline, and you let them bet anonymously so that they can think they'll make money and they won't suffer social retribution if, say, the manager of the project hears that they are betting against it.
Interesting.
And if you do that, you can get much more accurate estimates of whether you make the deadline or other sort of business things you're trying to do. And
so
at a relatively low cost. The estimates are constantly updated continuously. And you can ask a wide range of questions and get consistent answers across a wide range of questions, all by the simple mechanisms of setting up some betting markets.
So we come back to the why in many senses markets are efficient.
Right. So these standard efficient market arguments are used here and are true here, which is that if the boss tries to talk everybody up, say, of course we're going to make the deadline, raise those prices, then if they do manage to get people to raise prices, somebody else will say to themselves, that doesn't sound right. And they say to themselves, gee, the price is too high. I could make a bundle here if I sold and pushed it down. And that greed is used as a powerful force to get the prices back in line.
So when it came to our most recent national election, what do you think happened? Because we do have, I wouldn't say that we have the most liquid betting markets for those types of things, but we do have, people, like
right.
Nate Silver and 538. We have the Iowa electronic markets. What is it? Wall Street's another one with an HL.
So the basic thing that happened was that, at some point, a few months before Trump was elected president, the betting markets said there was roughly a 15% chance that would happen.
Right. Relatively
low chance. In previous elections, of course, it had often been much higher. 60 or 70% chance of picking the winner. One very simple answer is to say, well, a 15% chance means that 1 out of 6 times that it's going to go contrary to expectations.
Right.
And 1 out of 6 is a pretty common thing. So 6 elections every 4 years, that's 24 years. Once every 24 years, there'll be an election that's surprising.
Right.
That seems to me a completely sufficient answer to why did the markets get it wrong? Mm-hmm. Of course, there's the additional question. Okay, well, what was this surprise? What was the cause of the surprise? And how has the world changed because of that surprise? Every time there's any sort of surprise, you should ask yourself, has the world changed in some important way because of the surprise, or because of whatever caused the surprise?
And what do you think? What are your thoughts on that? I'm curious.
It's still somewhat open. I mean, I don't have anything especially individually original to add to this. It's not my area, but I'm happy to endorse what a lot of other people have said, which is that there was a subset of the United States that felt that the cultural elites in journalism and media and policy were ignoring them and neglecting them and dissing them. And they were looking for a champion to take their side unambiguously. Yeah. And they waited for a while for such a champion. And finally somebody came. And it wasn't the best one they would have wanted, but it was the one they had. Yeah. Who was willing to be their champion, and I think
they took him. Yeah, to me, I agree with that. I think it's spot on, and I think it's more symptomatic than it is, the real choice. I think it's just like you said, it just kind of fits a lot, pokes a bunch of the holes, not all of them, so we'll take it. Yeah, we'll just give it a shot. Yeah,
right. And now they're, I don't think they're terribly unhappy with their choice because in fact everybody is paying more attention to them now that they elected this representative of them.
So in your work as an economist, I'm curious, have you ever looked at something as simple as capital flows, right? Like there's not a lot of people that really look at how capital moves throughout the world over time, but there's a number of people that come up with the fourth turning and the turnings and all, the cycles, right?
Yeah. I always liked the Strauss and Howe books.
Okay.
I've been, read those for a long time.
I mean, so what are your thoughts on that topic? Because I think we're at a point now where, obviously the market is going higher, and I don't think there is any fundamental reason. I don't think this is just my personal opinion, I don't think there's any technical reason. I think it's purely behavioral right now, and the behavior is such that money is coming from everywhere else in the world. There's nowhere else for it to hide. They've bought all the real estate and that they want so to speak, in the United States. And now whatever is left, they're piling it into our own stock market.
So I am, in general, much more interested in looking at sort of consistent long-term trends or long-term stable facts than I am in trying to explain local fluctuations.
Okay.
And so I am much more interested in just saying, like, on average, like, the amount of money that goes into stocks or bonds or real estate or other kinds of investments, trying to understand just the basic average distribution into those things, understand what fraction of income people tend to put into savings versus other things, and just understand overall the business cycle and why it's the length of years it is, and what typically happens over the business cycle and the investment cycle. And so, as you well know, there does seem to be this boom and bust cycle in the economy and in investments. And it's somewhat random, so you can't nail it at any one moment. But
right.
It does look like the volatility of stocks is more than the volatility of the economy. So it tends to go up and then it tends to come down again.
Right.
There's a regression to the mean.
Yep.
And so that tells you that when you're unusually high, you're probably on the average going to be coming down in the future. You can't tell you it's right now exactly, but that's the longer term thing to expect.
But we're also getting to that point where we really haven't had and I'm doing air quotes, you can't see me, but we really haven't had retail participation since the last downturn. And a lot of people would argue that last downturn didn't really finish its move to the downside, meaning there was some invisible hand or whatever you want to call it that came into the market.
Could have been worse.
And so then, does your work get into any of those thoughts and that, like, when you have these invisible hands or these interventions, ultimately the market's going to do what it's going to do, and it's probably going to be your first loss, as they say in the trading world, is usually your best loss, and maybe we should have taken our medicine.
These are not things I'm focused on, although I read about them with some interest. But the first cut is to say, there's just a lot of randomness in all of these sorts of things, and whatever theory you have, you shouldn't be very confident in it, and you should cover yourself a bit here.
If
you're spinning some big elaborate story to tell yourself that you shouldn't sell stocks, maybe you should sell stocks.
Oh no,
you shouldn't need a big elaborate story.
I'm more on the sell stock stage, and I don't understand why they keep going up. So I'm actually taking pain. I'm in the pain stage.
Yeah. So I've been more of a sell mode myself.
Yeah.
Just because it looks like, hey, it's a record rise. It's about time. Sometime in the near future for a fall.
So then,
that's a very simple, naive, from a distance point of thing. I mean, but it is, I think, roughly right.
So do you think the brain ultimately will rationalize whatever it is they want that you want to believe? You being me.
Well, again, it's about, if we're not mostly trading to make money, it's about what other motives we have, and then how do these different trading strategies reflect on us with these other motives.
Yeah.
And so, if the price is going up and other people are making money, and then you pull out, you might feel, well, I'm admitting that I'm a loser here.
Right.
I'm admitting that I'm not as good as these other people think they are, because they at least are acting like they think they can pull out, they can time it better and wait a little longer.
Yep. Well, it's interesting,
so, that feels a little bad status-wise. It feels like you're admitting that you're not as good as them.
Well, how's this one for you? So I had a hedge fund that I closed at the end of 2006. It had been open for 4 years. It was small. I was both the trader and the asset gatherer. Very different. Both jobs.
Not a terrible time to pull out, though.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry. That wasn't a terrible time to pull out.
No. So, but let me say that it was because I was a short biased fund looking to capture 2008 and 2009. Does that make sense? So okay. I was. If you saw, Michael Lewis's, or you read his book, there was a fourth character in the book that he doesn't have in the movie. That is not me. It's not me per se, but that is my character, which was I could not convince my investors to hang on. I wasn't big enough to sustain myself. So I basically closed the fund and said, "Here's your money back." And great, we made 12% a year for 4 years, but
right.
the big.
You didn't make the win on the downside, but at least you avoided the loss on the upside.
This is true, and I did get a lot of nice calls from a handful of the investors after the 2008 and 2009 came, and they couldn't believe it. But that doesn't make me feel any better as
right.
And so again, this is where I go back to, why was I in it? Was I in it to satisfy those people? And maybe at the end of the day, then I am satisfied, even though I didn't benefit them financially in that in that manner, maybe just being
protected them from loss.
Yeah, but maybe just being told that I was right was satisfactory enough.
Yeah, that's a big satisfaction. Absolutely.
I don't know. So it's interesting. It's a fascinating subject. Where do you see your work from this book evolving? Like, obviously, you're going to get a lot of phone calls. How do you see this being used in everyday life?
Well, the first cut is just, for a lot of people, this is an eye-opener.
Yep.
I'm just putting together a lot of literature, most of which I didn't do, just showing you that the usual stories you've been hearing and you've been telling yourself are just pretty far from the truth about why you do a lot of things. And for a lot of people, that'll be insightful and somewhat disturbing, but they'll find ways to make use of it, even if it makes it harder for them to pretend otherwise.
Yep.
For those of us who do social science research, there's the open question of, I had 10 areas, but there's lots of other areas of life.
Yep.
We should go study other areas of life and say, well, what's the real motivation there?
Right.
And that's an issue with respect to prediction markets. You started to ask me about prediction markets.
Yes.
And there's a big issue there with prediction markets in that even though they consistently work better than the other alternatives people were using before, they still don't actually want to keep using them.
Why is that?
And I think that's because in most organizations we give lip service to prediction, but we're not actually that interested in predicting accurately.
Is that because we don't want that knowledge?
Well,
or?
It's because a lot of organizational activity is politics.
Yep.
It's various political factions who are supporting each other and undercutting rival factions, and when they do all the various things they do, they need to put a good face on it. And the standard good face is it's good for the organization.
Right.
And one of the most, acceptable good things that's good everywhere is information collection. Collecting information and sharing information is just good for everybody, you see. And how could anybody criticize that? And so we try to spin a lot of things we do in an organization as if it's all about collecting and sharing and processing information, all for our general benefit.
Right.
And so that ends up making it look like information collection and processing is important in organizations because, hey, that's what the label people are putting on an awful lot of what they're doing.
Right.
But it's not, in the sense that that's just the label. That's not what they're really doing. And so, but that fools people into thinking, well, if information collection is important in this mechanism you've got, prediction market, it collects information even better, then surely we must want it.
Right.
And then they don't realize once they get it going that, like, this mechanism is different from a lot of the other things they have. When you have a consultant or you hire a committee or have somebody do a statistical analysis, what you usually know is that you assign them a task and they come back to you with a tentative forecast and analysis.
Yeah.
And then you hint to them in various ways about how this tentative analysis might be neglecting some considerations or whatever based on the conclusion it's drawing. And you get a chance to spin it.
Right.
You get a chance to get them to give you a different answer that they want, and then you get a chance to spin whatever answer comes out. And that's a lot of what you're doing is spinning these various answers. And that's almost all other usual forecasting mechanisms come with these ways to spin. But once you set up the prediction market and it's open, Monday morning, and all of a sudden there might be this bad news the market says, and you didn't have a chance to spin it or explain it to anybody or prep anybody for it, and and you can't make it go away.
Yeah.
And if it's bad news and makes you look bad, it takes away a lot of your favorite excuses. So for example, if you've got a project with a deadline and you don't make your deadline, you need an excuse. And everybody's favorite excuse is, okay, something came out of left field, killed my project, and no one could have seen that coming. It'll never happen again. So there's no reason even to think about what to do about this in the future. So just let's forget about it and go on.
That sounds like most marital discourse also.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't mean nothing. She meant nothing to me. It was just a random weird thing that happened. Just don't worry about it.
Just happened. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, but if you had set up a prediction market where every day it tells you the chance the project will make the deadline, and then the chance keeps dropping day by day until it's really in the toilet, your excuse went away. You can't say this thing just came out of the blue and no one could see it coming because look, everybody seems to see it coming.
Right.
And that's just one example of how the prediction markets get in the way of the usual political way people manage perceptions and information in organizations.
Man.
But that shows you that the key problem is that we do things and we say we have one reason, we're really doing it for another reason. And my work in prediction markets has helped me see that in part in organizations, to see behind the appearance of what people say they're doing to what's really going on.
Well, this is where if I'm a big fan of Taleb, and when I think about how I view markets, I would rather not read newspaper or analyst viewpoints because I am, no matter what I say, I'm clouded by it.
Sure. Absolutely.
So I guess if I know that about myself and I avoid it, then that becomes at least, one of the clouds I don't have to sift through when making decisions. And part of the reason, why I came up with the name 1 Minute Trader is it really, I think we make things so much more complicated. I work with
right.
a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I work with traders and just getting them to slow down and discard much of the garbage and the information that is just coming their way is the hardest part of the game.
So that's again a difference between what we say we're doing and what we're really doing. So what we say we're doing, and in a sense what we should be doing, is looking at this big complicated world and deciding which few elements are the ones that are the most important that we can trust and just focusing on relying on those.
And for me, that is simply time and price.
Okay, but the key point is, and for any good trader, it might not be the same things, but they basically should look in the world of complexity, find a few things they can really trust, and just go with those.
Yep.
And try to ignore the rest of the complexity.
Yep.
But what we're often doing as social creatures is we're in a conversation of other people talking, and in that mode, we want to show that we are up on the conversation.
Totally.
We've heard what everybody else is talking about. We know about it. You can't surprise me with something other people are talking about that I haven't heard about. We compete with each other in these newsy social conversation worlds to track what everybody's saying and to be up with what everybody's saying. But that's a very different goal.
It is.
But that's kind of the real goal that we really have as these social creatures. But that gets in the way of this other goal.
It totally does.
A few most important things and sticking with them.
It totally gets in the way to the process of trading. It totally does. It's such a perverse world in that sense that
right. But if you don't really want to make money, you really just want to be part of the social world, and you just want to be trading as part of your being a social, then you don't mind losing the money.
Yeah, no,
be the social butterfly who knows things before other people do.
And I think the age old saying, you get what you want, you get what you need out of the markets is really true, because and that's where you come back to the participation of the different players. I think there's a certain number of people that's their end goal. They're just going to give money back and be able to talk wisely about gold or some macro. I like to call.
They got a story about how they were involved and what they heard, and who they were related to. They had this person they were investing in, and that person took their phone calls.
Right, and I get that. Like I totally get that, because in an earlier stage of my life, in an earlier stage as a trader, I would pay more attention to that. But I went cold turkey from CNBC 2005, and I think, I don't know, and again, maybe this is my own arrogance, but I think that kind of the political situation, the economic, social, where we are right now is all kind of coming together for kind of the masses where I was maybe 12, 15 years ago.
So, I mean, you're talking about traders, but I was just, at an event about media for high school students last week, and it was really the same topic, which was a lot of people saying, well, there's all this social media and everybody's looking at it, and I feel like I'm spending too much time on it,
right?
But it's not actually very useful, and there's not actually that much information there.
Right.
How can we get everybody to stop?
Yeah.
And of course, the answer is you can't get other people to stop.
Right.
They are being social. They're not actually getting much useful information, but they are being social, and people really like that.
Right.
If you want to do something else other than being social, you'll just have to cut yourself off and look at the actual stuff that's important for you, other things you're trying to do.
Yeah. And how about you? Are you a wide user of social media? Like, is it something you?
I have a community of people who are like talking more about the things I'm interested in, and I pay more attention to them. But I pay a lot less attention than other people I know.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just try to focus on the topics that I'm expert in. So
yeah.
I think for all of us, this whole temptation to like know the whole conversation and know about everything everybody's talking with is just a dangerous distraction. You really should pick something you're a specialist at, something you're going to be good at, and then learn that well. And on that, you tell the world what you know, because you know more about it. And on other stuff, listen.
Yes.
And believe what they say. You don't have to invent your own new theory and opinion about every little topic. JFK assassination or moon landings, or
right.
Just don't try to study every little topic like that and figure out what you think about it.
Yeah.
That's just use up your whole life.
Yeah, there's a monster fire hose blowing our way, isn't there? I mean, it's and again, I think it's difficult for kids because and by kids I mean
and adults and everybody
and adults.
It's difficult for everybody, honestly.
Yeah. Because we are social and we want to be tied in with the community, and we want to be, as you said, sound as if we're in the know. So we gloss over and we know just a little bit about everything, but yeah, it's dangerous. I agree.
Actually, it's just helpful to read about people thousands of years ago and how they treated news. I mean, that thousands of years ago, the news they got was tiny compared to the news we've got.
Oh, yeah.
To look at.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, they often spent a similar amount of hours per day pursuing news.
They did, really.
They would sit around coffee shops and other places and just chat with each other and pass rumors.
So yeah, well, you could even use something as simple as the Paul Revere story, right? I mean, basically, there's a guy riding on a horse,
right? But the biggest difference that's changed in the last few years is search, right?
Yeah.
Before, you just had to sit and wait for a stream of stuff to come past you and pick out the few things you were most interested in. But you don't have to do that anymore. You can just initiate a search.
Oh, it's crazy.
You want to enter the topic, you type in the thing to Google or whatever, and you are off and finding out about the thing you want to know. Not because it drifted past you, but because that's the thing you want to know about now. And then you can focus your effort on a topic and just see a bunch of related things all at once over the next few hours and learn that topic.
Well, I even wonder, like when I was a student in Ann Arbor, I mean, I would get lost in the stacks of the graduate library, and I wonder
as would I.
I wonder how many kids even do that today.
I know, but a key point, and they might do it on Wikipedia or something, but still, the key difference is being directed, like having in your mind the thing kind of sense of what you're looking for, and then picking up a book, going a bit first chapter and saying, that's not what I'm looking for.
Right.
I'm looking for the next thing and saying, is this what I'm looking for?
Mm-hmm.
And having you're in charge of where you're going.
A process.
Rather than just like waiting for the feed and watching all the things that pass through your feed.
I agree. Hey, well, Robin Hanson, I appreciate you coming on. I've taken enough of your time, and this has been fantastic, and I'm sure we will do this again because I'm intrigued, and I will continue going down the rabbit holes that you've sent me. Unfortunately, you've opened some new doors and some new paradigms for me, so I appreciate your work because that really, hopefully that is beneficial to you because I find it very interesting.
All right. And I hope your readers will look at The Elephant in the Brain, Hidden Motives in Everyday Life, out January 2nd from Oxford University Press.
And that is out January 2nd. Again, Elephant in the Brain, Hidden Motives in Everyday Life. And Robin, thanks again. And they can find you at Twitter, on Twitter, at Robin Hanson, Hanson, just so people know. Thanks again for coming on. Appreciate your time.
Been great talking to you.